Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation. This is a great day for all the countries involved, and we're very grateful for everyone who's participating. I'm particularly honored that my predecessor, Dr. Ed Fulner, is here with us today. He spent decades developing the positive relationships in Asia that support America and has kept Heritage very involved with Asian affairs, and he continues to do that today. So, Ed, thank you for joining us. This is truly a significant event involving representatives from the U.S. as well as two of America's most critically important allies. When people think of Northeast Asia, they usually think of media headlines about the threats. And there are significant threats. North Korea has an estimated 10 to 16 nuclear weapons and missiles that could attack South Korea, Japan, and U.S. bases in Asia. Recently, the commanders of the U.S. forces, Pacific Command, and the North America Aerospace Defense Command all publicly stated that North Korea even has a missile that can reach the U.S. mainland. We're also concerned about China's actions in both the East China Sea and the South China Sea, including building new islands in disputed waters. While these threats are real, they are met by the tireless efforts by the brave men and women in uniform of the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan to protect our citizens and our national interest, as well as to provide security for our shared interests beyond the region. Our diplomats also provide brave service to their nation. I'm so glad that we have such fine representatives of our foreign service, our former U.S. Ambassador Kim with us today. During my trip to Asia last year, I grasped not only the importance of Asia to America, but also the importance of America being involved in Asia. And we can only do that with the help of strong and true friends, economic partners, and allies. There are no better examples of that than the Republic of Korea and Japan. Our three guests today exemplify the spirit of those friendships and the importance of diplomacy. I already mentioned Ambassador Kim. Ambassador Kim is now U.S. Representative for North Korea Policy and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan. Ambassador Ahn is the Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the U.S. and previously served as the first Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Sasai is Ambassador of Japan to the U.S. and also previously served as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in Japan. I'm very honored to welcome you here today, gentlemen. Our event will be an informal discussion with these three distinguished diplomats, led by Heritage's Senior Research Fellow of Northeast Asia Policy, Bruce Klinger. Thank you all for joining us here at Heritage today. And now, Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. Well, I just want to echo my appreciation to all of our three distinguished ambassadors and to the audience for joining us here. I'll be asking questions of the three ambassadors, and then at approximately 3:45, we'll be taking questions from the audience that people have submitted via index cards, and then I'll receive those and then ask those until 4 o'clock. And being appreciative of the ambassador's time, we have a hard stop at 4 p.m. So I'm going to just launch right into it. Ambassador Ahn, 2015 dawned with renewed hopes for improved inter-Korean relations. Kim Jong-un's New Year's Day speech called for resuming suspended high-level contacts and even possibly a summit meeting between the Koreas. And President Park Geun-hye responded with her own offer of an unconditional summit. But later, the North Korean National Defense Commission declared that there could be no major change between the Koreas, even if there were 1,000 meetings of such officials. So, first of all, what caused the inter-Korean dialogue, which we had hoped for, to become derailed? And then, now that Pyongyang seems to have shut the door again on engagement with Seoul, will the Park administration wait for a change in policy by North Korea, or will it try something to draw them out?
Well, as a matter of fact, Bruce, you would understand there have been many proposals coming from North Korea and many proposals coming from South Korea for engagement. Then many of them, in fact, could not be consummated. And then that happened again and again and again. So if there is one pattern, one pattern is lack of consistency in the proposals and then how they have been handled along the way. So this derailment, which happened early in the year, there is no reason to be surprised about that, of course. But at the same time, I think the more important question would be this, which is that how, given such an understanding of how North Korea behaves with respect to engagement, both for the proposals coming from the North as well as from the South, how we take best advantage of those proposals. So that, I think, would be the more meaningful question. And I think there is only one answer. One answer would be, we should be extremely patient, and then we would have to be principled. And then when we are patient, when we are principled, then we can make best advantage of our proposals, and then we can make the best use of proposal coming from the North. And one good example would be Kaesong Industrial Complex. So back in 2013, again, you would still remember it in the sense that North Korea, one day, suddenly, they said, sorry, our workers, 50,000 workers, they wouldn't be coming for their work. All of a sudden, that's what we heard. And we said, fine, if that's what you wish to do, then we will wait. After several months, they said, there was no pressure as such. They came forward and then they said, may we please resend our workers to you? That's what happened in 2013. And then earlier this year, then of course you would still remember it in the sense that North Korea, they said, well, we are raising the wages. And then we said, well, it is not one-side deal. You, in fact, have to consult with us. And then at one single time, you cannot raise it more than 5%. And then they said, well, we mean it. We will raise it. And then we said, oh, well, if that is the case, then we are not going to pay it, right? On both occasions, then we were very patient, we were principled, and then at the end of the day, we in fact successfully could settle those hiccups according to the principles which we hold dear. So I think that's a lesson we are learning each time, and that's a lesson that we should be learning, but at the same time, we hope that North Korea would learn from those lessons.
Thank you. Ambassador Sasai, similarly, some saw the renewed bilateral talks between Pyongyang and Tokyo as North Korea's way not only of engaging Japan, but even perhaps to isolate the United States and the Republic of Korea. But Tokyo has not yet received the promised report from North Korea, including information on the abductees, as had been promised. So are the talks stalled? Are they just stalled, or are we just waiting or are you just waiting for a comprehensive report from North Korea? And in that report, what is Japan looking for? Is it looking for a full resolution of the abductee issue, or is there an interim step?
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. Before answering that question, let me express my sincere appreciation to you and Senator DeMint, other colleagues in organizing this event and inviting us. I think this is a very opportune moment for a country like the United States, Korea, and Japan, and to be addressing the issues of strategic importance to all of us. Often the case, world interest is on Middle East and some other places, but this North Korean question should be given more attention. And there are lots of mass media people today, so it's a good opportunity for us to join to address this question and to think aloud what we can do. So I just want to say thank you very much for doing this. Well, coming back to your questions about Tokyo, Pyongyang, talks, especially on this abduction issues. As you know, 2 years back, May year 2013, there was agreement that North Korea would go into a full investigation on all these abductees. And then in July, they said that they started, and this might be taking roughly a year, they said it, to more or less come back with a report. So around the time, now we thought that there will be a full report coming to us. But as you know, it's not coming out yet. Then about a week ago, they informed us that this would take a bit longer. So first of all, we have to express our regret that they are not really meeting the expectation on our part to see the North Koreans are coming up with full accounts of what they have investigated, what are the status. So we very much hopeful that they will continue to be seriously completing their investigation and coming with their full report. And in doing so, we continue to work over North Korean through various channels, and also to strongly demand and work over them to expedite the process so that all the abductees will be safely returned. That's what we have been seeing the status of the situation now.
Thank you. Ambassador Kim, since the Leap Day Agreement of 2012, things have been seemingly very quiet on the U.S.-North Korea front, so I presume you must have a lot of free time.
That's why I'm here today.
This year, Kim Jong-un sort of very characteristically declared that we are unwilling to sit down with mad dogs anywhere who keep howling that they are going to use methods of change to bring down our socialist system. If we look, an issue right now in the news is the possible U.S.-Iran nuclear agreement. So if we look at that, could we extrapolate that it would a successful agreement would lead Washington to turn toward Pyongyang for similar nuclear negotiations?
Thanks very much, Bruce. Let me also thank you, Senator DeMint, Mr. Funer, and others at Heritage for organizing this event. As ambassadors, as I said, I think this is a tremendous opportunity. I think it's quite meaningful that three of us are on the stage together to talk about the North Korean issue. In fact, three of us do enjoy very strong unity in dealing with the challenges posed by North Korea. And I think that gives us an opportunity to make some progress on this very difficult issue. Did they really say mad dogs?
They did.
Okay, well, I'll get to that later. But
and worse, but.
There's a lot of speculation that our work with Iran would naturally lead to resuming some negotiation with the North Koreans. I think it is true that our progress with Iran clearly demonstrates our willingness to engage countries with whom we have had very serious, long-standing differences. It's a clear demonstration of that. I think our work with Cuba is another important example. But in order to engage in a meaningful dialogue, we need a partner who's willing to engage in serious discussions and negotiations. As you know, we have been open to diplomacy with North Korea for some time now, and we have made several attempts over the past few years to make some progress. But unfortunately, ever since the Leap Day understanding fell through, we have seen no sign of interest or commitment on the nuclear issue in Pyongyang. And that really makes it difficult for us to proceed with any negotiation. But I should tell you that, we are ready and prepared if and when the North Koreans are ready to engage in credible, meaningful discussions and negotiations towards denuclearization. Let me just comment on mad dogs and other offensive and obnoxious things they have said about us and other countries. Frankly, I think it would be much better if they would spend their time worried about livelihood of their citizens and living up to their international obligations and commitments and refraining from provocative actions than spending their time trying to come up with offensive and obnoxious things to say about other countries.
Thank you. We've talked about engagement, and now to turn to what I would argue is the other side of the same coin, pressure or sanctions, targeted financial measures. At a recent trilateral meeting, the three countries agreed to increase pressure on North Korea. So Ambassador Sasai, I'll start with you this time. Going back to the abductee talks with North Korea, Tokyo agreed in July of 2014 to remove some of the sanctions in return for having established this, North Korea establishing an official committee to look into it. But this month, Nikkei reported that Japan was unlikely to reimpose its sanctions against North Korea, despite Pyongyang not having provided a report. So could you give me a sense of the current Japanese government view of whether it will impose stronger sanctions on North Korea, and if so, what those might be?
Well, first of all, we need to put this initial action to lift sanctions, some of the sanctions you said when we had agreement with North Korea to go into full investigations of the abductees. The measure lifted were rather of symbolic nature. It is basically letting the people were visiting North Korea, and also making some reporting requirement of cash outflow to North Korea, more or less in the similar fashion as other countries do, and also accept some of the North Korean vessels coming into our port for the humanitarian missions only. But other than that, I think our economic sanctions, on top of the UN sanction, is the most severe and biggest one. There is a total ban of export and import. Our trade is zero with them. If you look at the trade between China and North Korea, it's more than $6 billion a year. Even our friend Korea, they maintain $1 billion of trade every year. So the United States doesn't have any trade from the beginning. We used to have some trade, but for some years, we don't have any trade with them. So I think we place the most vigorous sanctions against North Korea. But when you try to negotiate and try to get into some deal with North Korea, obviously, if there isn't any sort of counter actions to expect their own action, and it's impossible to get something done simply by putting pressure, and expect something coming out. You have to be balanced in terms of putting pressure, and you said engagement. Engagement would naturally involve some of the incentive for us to give for, and that they will respond to that. So I think the nature of this initial lifting and sanction is very symbolic and minuscule in terms of overall implications of sanctions we have placed for many years. So that's, thank you for this. And that's the first point. And number two is that, since, as I said, there was no reporting coming out as we were expecting in terms of timing of the support. There are some debates here and there, but when it comes to government positions, we haven't made any decisions. So we were told that it might take more time. So we just try to work that out. And that's the standing we are now taking. So at this moment, if I'm asked, are we going to increase the sanctions or not, when it comes to specific actions, I think we haven't come to any decision. But the only thing I can say is that we would measure out the most effective ways to get our objective to be fulfilled.
Good. Thank you. Ambassador Kim, after President Obama issued a new executive order in January in response to the not only the Sony hacking, but also the physical threats against U.S. citizens, U.S. officials described it as a first step, saying it's certainly not the end. And then in May, Secretary Kerry, while in Asia, criticized North Korea's provocative, destabilizing, and repressive actions and unacceptable behavior, and then he declared the international intent to increase pressure and increase the potential for either sanctions or other means to alter Kim Jong-un's behavior. So as we look at those declarations, can you give us a sense of what additional sanctions or targeted financial measures that the U.S. has in mind, such as applying existing U.S. law that we've done to other countries, or whether it would be more something that the U.S. does in conjunction as multilateral sanctions with either the other two countries or more broadly?
Thanks, Bruce. Maybe a couple of broad points. One is that I think there's strong consensus, certainly among the three of us, but I believe among the five parties, including the Chinese and the Russians, that pressure is a very important part of our overall approach on North Korea. As Ambassador Sasai pointed out, pressure alone is not sufficient, but pressure in combination with diplomacy and engagement and deterrence, I think is, in fact, a very important part of our approach and policy. We want to continue to work to strengthen enforcement of existing sanctions. That's a given. That's both for UN Security Council resolution sanctions, but also our US unilateral sanctions. Much of that will require strong international cooperation, so we continue to engage in diplomacy internationally to make sure that countries are cooperating with us fully. The other part is exploring what new areas we can use to apply pressure or enhance pressure on North Korea, and that's an ongoing effort. As you pointed out, when the president signed the new executive order in January, we made clear that the designations that were done at that time were just the start. And we are continuing to evaluate all of the available information and intelligence to make cases for additional designations. I don't have any specific measures to announce today, but I can assure you that it is an ongoing effort, and we're in very close coordination with our partners, particularly in Tokyo and Seoul.
Thank you. Ambassador Ahn, after the sinking of the Cheonan in 2010, South Korea imposed very wide-ranging punitive measures, including cutting off all trade with Pyongyang except through the Kaesong industrial zone. And there have been calls by some in South Korea that this has impeded inter-Korean relations and that those May 24th measures, as they're called, should be removed in order to improve or jumpstart inter-Korean relations. Now, so what conditions would it take for Seoul to remove those post-Cheonan sanctions? And conversely, to increase pressure, would Seoul either reduce or eliminate its involvement in Kaesong, given that inter-Korean trade last year was really at a record high of $2 billion in 2014, according to the Ministry of Unification?
As a matter of fact, I was carefully listening to Ambassador Sasai and then Ambassador Kim. And I think there is a common thread in what the two ambassadors are saying. And then the common thread is we should be putting into perspective what we have been doing so far before we move ahead. I think that is the common thread I find in the answer coming from Ambassador Sasai as well as Ambassador Kim. And I think from time to time it helps to try to put our issues in perspective. The reason why I said is this, which is that I often hear this question, what else could we do in order to, for example, make advancement on the issue of denuclearization? That's the question I often have to face during And whenever I hear the question, then I think there is a certain degree of frustration lying behind those questions. You feel frustrated when you raise the question with me, right? And then I feel frustrated as well. But at the same time, I think if we try to put all of these issues in perspective, and then try to think about what was happening in North Korea for the past 25 years, then maybe there are many reasons why we need not be that much frustrated. Number one, let us just think about North Korean economy. We often say it is 2.5% of South Korean economy. North Korean economy is 2.5% of South Korean economy. But it was not always that small. So back in 1990, when this North Korean nuclear issue first came on the surface, North Korean economy, it was 8.5% of South Korean economy. So for the past 25 years, it has been coming down from 8.5% to 2.5%. So we should be asking the question, why did it happen? It came down all the way for the past 25 years. Why did it happen? And I think one very important reason why it happened is because of misallocation of resources. And then this question about gone or bottom, that of course is one of the most classical questions in statecraft. And then this is maintaining balance between gone and bottom. Somehow North Korea failed miserably in maintaining the balance between gone and bottom. And what I think is important is even North Koreans realize it. So that, I think, is the reason why these days they are talking about Pyongyang policy, meaning, well, on the one hand, we will have our nuclear weapons, but on the other hand, we will do everything possible to develop our economy. In other words, we will eat the cake and have it too. We will have the gun and have butter as well. But as I already said, it doesn't work that way, right? So we can visualize it is going to get only worse in North Korea. That is the economic crisis. Second crisis they're having is the diplomatic crisis. And when we say diplomatic crisis, then of course we often think in terms of relationship North Korea has with big powers, with China, with Russia. But at the same time, the diplomatic crisis North Korea has, it is far more widespread than that. And one good example would be something called COI report. That's a Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea. COI report, it was adopted by United Nations General Assembly last year. And I was looking at the voting pattern, and I was shocked to go through the voting pattern. Why? Because there are 108 non-aligned movement countries. And I have been dealing with non-aligned movement for a long, long time. And then we, in fact, have very little access to non-aligned movement. Then that, in fact, has been a fertile ground for North Korean violence. I was looking at member countries belonging to NAM. There are 108 of them. Only 17 of those 108 supported North Korea. That, in fact, tells a lot about the diplomatic isolation in which North Korea finds itself. So that is the diplomatic isolation. And then the third serious problem North Korea is having, that is the enormous problem they have in terms of deficit of legitimacy. Let us just think about thousands of North Koreans who are fleeing from the country, and mid and then high-level defectors from North Korea. And then it is reported that at least 70 higher echelon Communist Party and then military and then government officials were executed, 70 of them, after Kim Jong-un came to power. And again, it is going to get only worse. I mean, there is to say deficit of legitimacy is going to get only worse. Why? Because all the outside information, it is finding its way into North Korea. And this deficit of legitimacy, it is going to only get worse. So let us just try to put them together. Economic crisis, diplomatic difficulties, deficit of legitimacy. They will have cumulative effect upon North Korea's capability as a nation, including capability to build the weapons of mass destruction. So that may be the reason why I think from time to time we better put all of these issues in perspective. And then when it comes to post-Cheonan May 24 measure, then what we are telling North Korea is this, which is that we know you are interested in Pyongyang policy. We know you are interested in economic development. We know you want post-Cheonan measures to be removed. Well, we will put it on the table. Come forward and let's start the process of dialogue. So that's what we are telling them.
As Senator DeMint mentioned in his remarks, is when we think of North Korea, when we read articles about North Korea, we're focused so heavily on nuclear weapons and missiles. But that often overlooks the very tragic human rights conditions within North Korea and the really horrendous conditions that the citizens there face. But over a year ago, as Ambassador Ahn mentioned, the UN Commission of Inquiry report released really a devastating report on the condition of human rights abuses in North Korea, and that even concluding that these violations were so widespread and systemic that they constituted crimes against humanity. And that this report, I think, far more than other NGO or reports or stories, really raised the public awareness of North Korean human rights to an unprecedented level and generated very strong reactions from Pyongyang. And in a shameless commercial, next Wednesday on this stage, the Heritage Foundation is hosting an event with Lee Hyun-so, the North Korean defector, who's the author of the recently released The Girl with 7 Names, who will tell her story, and then followed by a panel discussion of 3 human rights experts. Ambassador Kim, in April of this year, the State Department vowed it was reviewing options over the COI report, but to date has not yet sanctioned any North Korean entities for human rights violations. So what would be the next step for the State Department or for the U.S. more broadly to take action on North Korean human rights?
So let me just say that the last year was a very important year in terms of our efforts on human rights, North Korean human rights situation. As you mentioned, the COI report, Commission of Inquiry report, received a great deal of attention, and it really helped to elevate attention to this very important issue. We commend the work of the Commission, and we very strongly support its call for accountability on all of the human rights violations that happen in North Korea. We also had very strong resolutions in the Human Rights Council as well as the UN General Assembly. The UN Security Council, for the first time, was able to get the North Korean human rights issue on its permanent agenda. More recently, we had the establishment of the field office for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul, which is also a very positive development. So what we want to do is to work with our partners and the international community to continue to build on this positive momentum, to sustain the attention that we have on this very painful and important issue. With respect to specific sanctions, again, I don't have any measures to announce today, but I can assure you that we have not ruled out any possibilities or options, and that we will continue to evaluate evidence and information and make determinations as necessary.
Great. Ambassador Ahn, do you think that this COI report and really the momentum that's been generated by it, as well as the establishment of the Human Rights Office in Seoul, might lead South Korea, the National Assembly, to pass a North Korean Human Rights Act after really 10 years of debate?
For COI report, it was released in February last year. And you just described about all this international, say, reverberation that was created by the release of this report. And then it is one thing to vaguely understand that human rights situation is very bad in North Korea. But at the same time, if you read this report, then it is shocking. And then it in fact is a very detailed description of a very gory, I have to say, very gory detail of the violation of human rights in North Korea. So that is the reason why I think it shocked the international conscience. And then, well, in my long years of foreign service career, from time to time I have to deal with human rights issues. I had my own fair share of meeting with human rights activists. And then what they are telling me is this, which is the number one stage, there is awakening international conscience about certain human rights issues. Second stage, there is action. Usually the first stage is more difficult. When there is sufficient awakening of international conscience, then usually they easily move to the second stage, which is the stage of action. And I think this creation of UN Office on Human Rights in North Korea in Seoul, that I think would serve as a kind of focal point for leading international efforts for taking actions. Because actions are important, but at the same time, if there is a focal point, then of course all those actions would in fact be sufficiently expedited because of the presence, as well as all the efforts that is going to be made through that UN Human Rights Office. So that is the reason why we are extremely encouraged about this office being established. At the same time, with respect to this specific question about North Korean Human Rights Act in Korea, then I think, of course, well, in the broader picture, all of this awakening of international conscience, as well as this momentum we find in the direction of more meaningful actions in order to improve human rights issues. I think all of them would, in fact, be influencing this process.
Thank you. Ambassadors aside, clearly the abductee issue is a human rights issue between Tokyo and Pyongyang. But more broadly than that issue, what measures could Japan use to address the North Korean human rights situation, their violations of international agreements and the like?
I think a very important tool of pressure over North Korea is to let their governance of terror and human rights abuse, the horrible situation be known to the world. And in doing that, Japan has been taking initiative to propose all these UN human rights resolutions to Human Rights Council and or General Assembly of the United Nations over the past decade every year together with the European Union. So we are leading this international effort to keep the light to the situation in North Korea and all these human rights violations, and try to raise the awareness of the world that we need to be more seriously looking into the situation and take actions collectively, not only in terms of global opinion, but also supporting some of the actions United States, Korea, and Japan, and other countries in the region try to open the way to have a more meaningful discussions, not only nuclear and missile issue, but also all these human rights issues, not only limited to abduction issues. So what I can do is that together with LOK and American friends to support this, human rights commissioner in the United Nations to be more active, and they need to be given access to North Korea. North Korea has been rejecting physical entry of these UN officials for many times. And also to try to address this question in more serious gravity, including UN Security Council. And eventually, I think we have to work out something more specific, as Ambassador Kim mentioned. I think in the future, if there is no improvement, whatever, then we have to sit down and to work out what could be done jointly through the United Nations and also collectively as a will of the nations around North Korea.
Right. Well, I have questions on the security issues, but since we're at the time I promised I'd go to the audience questions, I'll turn to those, and we'll try to give each of our ambassadors sort of an equal number. Starting with Ambassador Sasai, we all remember you made a proposal to the Korean people in March of 2012 regarding the comfort woman issue, and it's called it the Sasai proposal. And at that time, Ambassador Ahn received the proposal through the strategic dialogue of the two countries, but there were differences there, and it didn't come to fruition. So the question is, do you still support the idea, or is there an alternative proposal that you would make now?
Well, first of all, I didn't make any official proposal to Ambassador Ahn at the time. We had a very informal discussion as a friends, and so I'm not in a position to disclose whatever the informal discussion we had carried at the time. And but even at the time, I think this issue was a serious one. We seriously tried to address the issues, and today we continue to address the questions. I think there is a serious discussions underway, and I hope that we could deliver whatever the agreement in the future that will be leading to the better relationship. I'm sure about it. And so whatever the past discussion, it isn't much useful to discuss about all this, what kind of exchanges were taking place or not. I think what is more important is what is being addressed and discussed and how that will be turned out. And I'm basically trying to be optimistic about the ability of both governments to get together to work out.
Okay. Ambassador Kim, particularly during your time in Seoul, you worked closely with General Scaparrotti and his predecessors. So how do you see the alliance preparations now for responding to what some might see as the next inevitable North Korean provocation or even attack?
I think the alliance we have with the Republic of Korea is one of the strongest security partnerships we have anywhere. It's robust in every aspect, and it's quite unique in its combined forces command structure, which has worked beautifully for the past 60+ years. And we're continuing to modernize and update the alliance to make sure that we maintain the strongest possible deterrent capability on the peninsula so that we will be prepared to deal with whatever provocative actions the North Koreans take. I'm quite confident that we have the capability to deal with whatever actions North Koreans take. And if you just look at what happened over the past year, so we made a number of important accomplishments. For example, we have a new agreement on the timeline for the affirm transfer. This is when we would give more authority to the South Korean military. And that agreement took into consideration the security environment, improving rock capabilities, etc. And I think we reached a clear understanding on what would make most sense in terms of maintaining that strong capability in the peninsula. We also have a new special measures agreement. This governs Korea's contributions, burden sharing to the cost of stationing 28,500 troops, U.S. troops on the peninsula. And although not directly relevant to military aspects, I think our new 123 agreement, this civil nuclear cooperation agreement, also deepens and strengthens our relationship overall. So I'm very confident and optimistic about the ability of our alliance to deal with whatever contingencies we have from the peninsula.
Ambassador Ahn, during the last year or so, we've seen a strong increase in the South Korean-Chinese relationship. Xi Jinping's visit was marked by a very strong feeling of very strong strategic relationship between the two countries. But others would argue that China has been an impediment to resolving the North Korean situation. So to what degree do you see that Washington and Seoul and Tokyo need to gain concurrence from Beijing, even for unilateral actions that we might want to take against North Korea after a provocation, or even for its continued violations of the UN resolutions?
Well, for that particular question, when Ambassador Kim, earlier in his remarks, he was talking about this with very important process of trying to coordinate among three countries, among Korea, Japan, and then the United States on the issue of North Korean issue. But at the same time, he said it is also very important to try to do it among 5 countries as well, on top of those 3 countries, and including China and Russia as well. And then I totally agree with what Ambassador Kim has to say, in the sense that let us just think about capital, let us just think about all the oil, let us think about all the important amounts of Syria that are flowing into North Korea. And then all of them are in fact being done through the channel of China. So in other words, whatever we may wish to do with respect to pressure North Korea to move in the direction we want North Korea to move to on various different issues, including nuclear issue. Then of course, much of the leverage is being held by China. So it is extremely important to coordinate our position among 5 countries, and that, as I understand it, is exactly what is happening now. So again, earlier today, then I was suggesting about the importance of being patient, importance of being disciplined, as a kind of general principle we should be employing when it comes to our relationship with North Korea, and then the same patient, the same principle position we have to apply to the process of denuclearization.
Ambassador Sasai, I have a short question, but I think it puts you on the spot a bit. Would you make a prediction on the outcome of the TPP talks in Maui?
Well, thank you. I want to believe so. First of all, this debate in the Congress, initially we are a bit worried because we weren't quite sure that all this negotiating mandate by TPA will be okay. But eventually it was passed. If it didn't, it was a strategic mistake and a great retreat in terms of American standing and position in the region. So in that sense, it was good to see that the American government was given a mandate to negotiate. And then I think the important thing is for us to quickly wind down the negotiations in Maui. And I think there is a momentum built on now. And our talks with the American government is coming to the final chapter, and we are ready to finish it. And with that big momentum, we need to work with other participants to finish the job. Of course, there's always difficulties when you try to wrap up the negotiations, but you need to be ambitious when you expect the chief negotiators to conclude and to be followed by the ministerial. So I try to be always optimistic about this venture because I think underlying environment in the region is positive, and everybody is willing to go for this in spite of all the difficulties of each participating country. So yes, my answer is yes, and I would presume that there will be, even if there isn't 100% complete agreement, but if there is almost agreement, that will be successful.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Ahn, if I put Ambassador Sasai on to the test with 3 initials, if I could do so with you with 5 initials, THAAD. That has been an issue of a great deal of speculation, particularly in the South Korean media, about whether the U.S. is seeking deployment of the missile defense system to Korea. Been Chinese statements sort of arguing against deployment. There's a bit of a diplomatic to and fro as to what the status of such a request may or may not be. Maybe if you could just sort of see how you see the issue playing out this just for the rest of the year as to perhaps a U.S. request and South Korea addressing what some in the media are portraying as pressure from both the U.S. and pressure from China.
Well, I look around the hall, and then I think this is a very learned, well-informed audience. So I think the audience, they already understand the present status of the THAAD already, which is that there has been no request for consultation as such. So there will be very little I should be telling on that particular point, that five-letter initial you just mentioned. But at the same time, I think behind your question, there is even a broader question. And the broader question would be, what is the nature of this threat arising from North Korea? Conventional threat, weapons of mass destruction, and then more and more cyber threat, etc., etc. So that will be an even bigger question lying behind your question. And then another bigger question would be, are we prepared to deal with all those threats arising from North Korea? And then again, I agree with Ambassador Kim when he says that yes, we are. And I think in order to deal with the threat arising from missiles, and of course we have something called KAMD, Korea Area Missile Defense. And in order to deal with them, then of course we have to have not only missile defense, but also we should be substantially improving our and enhancing our strength capabilities. So we are doing it, which we call a kill chain project. And then on top of it, of course, Ambassador Kim has been talking about this very unique command structure we have between Korea and the United States, which is a unified combined command, which in fact is a very unique structure we have, and then we have had it since 1978. And what I always think is this, which is that this is 60-year-old alliance between Korea and the United States. But at the same time, I think more appropriately, we should be calling it 60-year young alliance. Why do I say that? It's because the challenge has been changing all the time, and then issues have been changing all the time. Somehow, this alliance has been very, very successful in continuing to renew the alliance relationship. So, addressing the broader question lying behind your question, what is the nature of the threat? What is the capability we need? Then again, this is the word which has been used by Ambassador Sasai. I'm basically very optimistic. And then that sense of optimism should, in fact, be invoked with respect to one of the questions you raised with Ambassador Sasai, which is the kind of consultation we had, friendly discussion in the description of Ambassador Sasai we had back in 2012. And then at the time, we just happened to be vice foreign ministers at the same time in each of our foreign ministries. And then we had that consultation between Korea and Japan. And then I think this is the time, this is the 50th anniversary of normalization relations between Korea and Japan. This is the 50th anniversary. And then somehow, June 22nd, then we passed the day in a very positive manner, in the sense that my president has been to the reception hosted by Japanese embassy in Seoul. Prime Minister Abe has been to the reception hosted by Korean embassy in Tokyo. And our foreign minister came to visit Tokyo. And of course, Foreign Minister Yoon and Foreign Minister Kishida, they've been meeting each other on various different occasions, but there was always on the margin of plurilateral meetings, on the margin of multilateral meetings. So for the bilateral meeting, for the purpose of bilateral meeting, it was the first ever meeting between two foreign ministers, between Foreign Minister Yoon and Foreign Minister Kishida. So there was a lot of goodwill we tried to create through that the momentum has been created. And I think this is 50th anniversary year of normalization relations between Korea and Japan. I think we should be taking advantage of every issue we have. We should be taking advantage of every opportunity we have so that we could take best advantage.
Ambassador Kim, I'm afraid I don't have any acronyms for you, but to raise one last one for both Ambassador Sasai and Ambassador Ahn, and that's UNESCO. We had what I would see as a very successful meeting over the weekend, but still controversial. So Ambassador Sasai, I would ask, after Japan won the World Heritage status for the proposed sites, there's been some controversy over whether Japan acknowledged a legal responsibility on the wartime labor of Koreans. So how would you see that seen as a controversy?
I think most important outcome of this talk between Japan and Korea evolving around UNESCO World Heritage issue is the fact that we consulted and we reached agreement, and both Japanese proposal and Korean proposal in UNESCO were adopted with consensus. I think that's the most important things to talk about. Of course, there are some debates around it in reference to the history, but I think I don't want to get into too much, appraisal of what kind of exchanges were taking place between the two governments in the process up to this final agreement. I think I'm very much happy and satisfied to see that in spite of some of the difficulties each country has domestically, foreign ministry and the government, whole governments of the both countries could deliver and make agreement. That's what we should be proud of, what we should be praised for. And other things are minor. I should define that way.
Ambassador Ahn, this will be our final question since we're running out of time before we're running out of questions. A concern on the other side is that, and actually the question would be, is South Korea willing to address Tokyo's concern that further progress on these issues, UNESCO and others, makes it vulnerable to lawsuits? Is that something that South Korea is willing to take steps to try to assuage that kind of concern?
The Korean Court of Law, it is very, very independent, as it should be. So, and then of course the use of the Korean court system. Of course, we cannot keep Korean citizens from doing it. But at the same time, I think when it comes to how we deal with it, then of course there is certain leeway that there is left for the government as such. And I think that is the reason why when we have to deal with the decisions of the court and measures by the government, in fact we should be differentiating the rulings of the court. They should be independent. But at the same time, how we deal with, as responsible government officials, how we deal with the rulings, decisions made by the court of law, that in fact is up to the government. And then, as I already said, there could be certain leeway in how to interpret and how to apply those rulings to the relations between the Then when it comes to another 5-letter acronym, UNESCO, then the thing is the words are already there. It has already been agreed upon between 2 foreign ministers. And whether it is forced to work or forced labor, let's forget about how we came to the conclusion. The words are already there. And then that's the wording which has been agreed upon by 2 foreign ministers. And then I agree with Ambassador Sasai when he says that what is even more important is not so much how we came to the agreement, how we implement it. And then that, in fact, is exactly what the senior delegate to the UNESCO meeting said. That is to say, we, in fact, appreciate the efforts made by the international community to come to this particular wording, but at the same time, what has been called upon by UNESCO was calling upon Japan to implement what has been agreed upon. So the implementation would be a very important process, and then that is the reason why I suggested earlier on that this good momentum which has been created on the occasion of 50th anniversary of normalization relations between Korea and Japan, we in fact should be applying this spirit of agreement to all the issues we have, so that this momentum will be working to our favor. So we favor this very precious opportunity which has been created.
Well, thank.
Right. Yeah. May I just add one thing? And I think we all know that journalists of both countries are debating, carrying all this article in their papers. But this is my view that we shouldn't read too much into the specific language. And once you begin to discuss too much in it, I think each side has its own say. So I think the important thing is that we need to move on and not really try to take advantage of whatever statement was made. I think we should move on and to address the issues in a separate dimension.
Well, I want to thank our 3 distinguished guests, and I think a sign of a good event, like a good party, is you run out of time before you run out of interest and you run out of questions. So if everyone will please join me in thanking our 3 ambassadors.